Welcome, everybody, to Firehouse Talks with Jersey Rick, Igniting Leadership Excellence. I'm Rick, and this is my co host, Emily.
Hi.
We are on episode 34 in season number 2, and today's topic is Leaders Connect with People. Our podcast is where we talk about anything and everything related to leadership, and we do have a biblical worldview that we come from. So, again, our episode today is Leaders Connect with People. So, Emily, I'll turn it over to you and you can lead into this.
Yes, let's start by talking about the Benjamin Franklin Bridge. So in 1926, it marked the opening of the 9,650-foot Benjamin Franklin Bridge connecting Philadelphia, Pennsylvania to Camden, New Jersey over the Delaware River. Prior to that, people had to use the ferry to cross the river. So just as bridges connect cities, leaders must also build relationships to connect with their teams.
Mhm.
So the question is, what's the impact of connected versus distant leadership on workplace culture and morale?
Yeah, so that's a great example. And that example, folks, came out of my book, The Furnace of Leadership Development, where I talk about connecting with people. Because as leaders, if you're not connecting with people, you are distant, and it is going to have an impact on the culture and is going to have an impact on the morale.
Yeah.
And if you can imagine all the way back to the time period of 1926, when people going from Camden over to Philadelphia, or vice versa, they had to take the ferry, just like my grandparents did. They worked at Wanamaker's in Philadelphia. My grandfather was a woodworker, and my grandmother worked in accounting, but they lived over on the Jersey side, so they had to take the ferry back and forth to work. And as you can imagine, there's a time constraint there. But once the bridge is built, now there is that connection. And I've been across the Benjamin Franklin Bridge quite a few times to get into Center City, Philadelphia. And there's other bridges connecting Jersey with Philadelphia and Pennsylvania as well. But just like that bridge that connects one piece of land to another piece of land, that's what connecting with people does. It's a connection aspect.
Mm.
And I have seen both sides of this coin in my career, both, working in the Air Force and the Marine Corps, or working at Loveland Fire, working some other jobs as well. And I hesitate to use word leaders all the time because sometimes the people who in charge are really nothing more than managers.
Yeah.
But John Maxwell's got a book called Everyone Communicates, Few Connect. And folks, if you haven't read that book, I encourage you to do so because when we are leaders, we do need to connect with people, building those authentic, not fake, but building authentic connections with people, not something superficial. Because they'll know about that, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But when the leaders, supervisors, bosses, whatever you want to call them, when they are not connecting with the people that are working for them, it starts to create a distance between the troops and the people at the top.
Yeah.
And there can be a lot of excuses about why we just don't connect. Well, I don't have the time. That's probably the biggest one that I hear is I just don't have the time to do that. And I especially hear that out of chief officers.
Mhm.
And if you've listened to our podcast before, you know that when I was a battalion chief, I spent time in the stations. This excuse from chiefs of, well, I just don't have the time. I loved it. Absolutely loved it here a few months ago. I was listening to a podcast called Beneath the Helmet, and the host, his name's Arjuna George, he was interviewing Frank Lieb, who's a retired deputy chief from FDNY. Okay, FDNY, largest fire department here in the United States of America. And Chief Lieb, his advice to chief officers was get out in the stations and visit your people. So, for everybody else who's coming from the smaller fire departments, not as big as FDNY,
Yeah.
if they can do it, So can you.
Yeah,
So yeah, that's because that adds to the culture of the organization as well.
absolutely. And I think
Oh,
the key
excuse
word,
me.
like you said, is authentic,
Mhm.
being authentic
Yeah.
in your connection.
Hmm.
So, would you say, is it a misconception of leadership as a distant or detached role?
Yes, absolutely. I would say that that is a misconception that as you get into a higher rank or position, depending on, your occupation, whether you're in emergency services or, the military, whatever it is, that is a myth that the higher up you go, the more distant and disconnected you have to
Mhm.
be,
Yeah.
because, leadership does not mean detachment from the people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, what are the consequences of disconnected leadership?
Rumors.
Mm,
That's one of the first ones, Emily, as I have seen that play out. And people are good at concocting their own stories. So when the leadership, the management supervisors, when they are disconnected from the people, then the rumor mill starts to get going. And as I just said, people are really good about building their own stories.
yeah.
I remember a situation. I was a lieutenant working at one of the fire stations here at Loveland Fire Rescue, and one of my coworkers on the other shift, uh, he wasn't there in the morning. A shift changed. So I
Mhm.
thought, wow, he must have went home sick. And I asked about him, and they said, well, he's no longer here. He's no longer here. Yeah,
Hmm.
he's gone.
Wow.
He's gone. Well, I started to suspect what would happen. But later on that morning, we were doing a training with a neighboring fire department, and one of those guys from that other fire department knew this gentleman and asked how he was doing.
Hmm.
Well, those of us, because it was two of our stations, and our battalion chief was out there, we didn't say anything. And this fella just said, "Oh," like that. And our battalion chief, in his very official, chiefly manner, stood upright in his white shirt and gold badge. And Lieutenant such and such is no longer with Loveland Fire Rescue, just like that. And I am not allowed to say anything.
Hmm.
And everybody's just looking at him, looking at the BC.
Hmm.
And then his friend from the other department made a comment, and our BC said, well, I could tell you it was nothing putative in nature. Just like that. So you know what happened, Emily, is the
Hmm.
rumor mill's cranking up. Why is this guy not here
Yeah.
anymore? What is going on? Well, and first of all, our battalion chief at that time, he was that type of guy. Just had to come across, it was very inhuman.
Hmm.
The man that was there no longer what was really liked by everybody. He was a really good firefighter and a good officer. I learned a lot from that guy, and I did not appreciate how it was handled. If anybody from human resources listening to this, why don't you people actually get human?
Yeah.
Get human. Yeah,
Hmm.
I know a lady a little bit further south here in Colorado, and I'll mention her name because she's in business herself, and her name is Bonnie Brindle. And actually, Bonnie is working towards humanizing human resources. And so when somebody goes away like that, and then HR issues these mandates,
Yeah.
that you can't say anything, the rumor mill got cranked up. Well, about a week later, he showed up at the fire station,
Hmm.
and it was a medically related issue. And that's what I had suspected all along. And we had a really good talk. And listen, folks, I know that there's a fine line in there. You could cross over and you could share too much information. And then when you don't share anything, but certainly when you take that very authoritative stance, like our battalion chief did, that just shuts everybody down. Now,
Yeah.
I was a battalion chief myself, and there's a human element to connecting with people. And I'll also mention that that particular battalion chief I had, the only time he showed up at the station is if there was a problem
Hmm.
or if he was delivering the mail. And he'd come out and deliver the mail, and he'd say, I need to talk to you outside, Rick. So we'd go outside on the front ramp of the station. He'd light up a cigarette and he would complain about the fire department. He would complain about certain people on our shift. He would complain about the fire chief. He would complain about one of my peers who actually was a problem child, which I found out later on when I was promoted to battalion chief. For as much bellyache complaining as my BC had done about this guy, he had never, ever written anything negative in this guy's evaluation.
Wow.
But that's a different story altogether right there. But he would not connect with us. Not one time did he ever come in the station and say, "Hey, let's get a cup of coffee and sit down." It was just drop the mail. Let's go outside, Rick. Light up a cigarette, suck that thing down, complain. Okay, I'll see you later. Yeah, and hop in his command
That's
vehicle
a great way
and
to
take
boost
off.
morale too.
Oh yeah, it
Not
was,
complaining.
yeah. Yeah, I forget which movie it was. It might have been in the Band of Brothers or Saving Private Ryan, where they were talking about, don't gripe down, gripe up.
Hmm.
Meaning that if he was going to gripe about other people on the shift, don't gripe down to them about to me, go to one of your peers. But I'll give him this. We had been peers ourselves for a long time, and we had known each other for a long time. And so I did look at it often as I'm his venting source. He could
Yeah.
come out and he trusted me because I wasn't running back in the station telling everybody. I wasn't telling anybody what he was saying to me. But the point being is his lack of ability to connect with the shift made him a distant individual. And with some people, they were actually afraid to talk to him
Hmm.
because of that distance
That's
that
too
he
bad.
had created.
That's too bad.
Yeah, yeah.
So, was that your personal example, or did you have another
Oh,
example?
I do have a lot of examples, and that one. It took a little bit more time than I thought. When I was in the military, uh, there was one fella that was entirely too friendly with everybody, but we're going to talk about that here, in a little bit.
Alrighty, so the power of authentic engagement is showing real interest in the employees' lives. So let's talk about some practical ways to connect.
Okay, so let's lay some groundwork right there, Emily, about practical ways to connect. As a leader, connecting with people does not mean you abdicate your authority. And on the other side of that thing, it's not like that battalion chief that I just described either. There's a line in there that's got to be maintained, and we need
Yeah.
to be mature enough to know where that line is. So, are we asking, meaningful questions of people? When I went out to the stations, and hey, when I was first promoted to battalion chief, people knew me. They knew me as I came up through the ranks, and they knew me as a lieutenant, but they didn't know me as a battalion chief. So I was an unknown individual at that rank, and they did not know what they were going to get. Matter of fact, Floyd, 2 years after I'd been there at BC, I was having coffee out at their station, and Floyd had driven for me at one time too when I was a lieutenant. And he said, "Yeah, Rick," he said, well, he'd call me Chief, he didn't call me Rick, and he said, "Yeah, Chief," he said, I knew what I was getting with you as a lieutenant." He said, "But I wasn't quite sure what we were going to get in you as a battalion chief."
Hmm.
Well, to overcome that, I'm not sure what we're going to get in you is it comes back down to that connection. It comes back down to that time with people, and it means asking them meaningful questions.
Yeah.
Well, not just a typical, "Hey, how you doing?" I mean, so many people ask, "Hey, how you doing?" Yeah, no,
That's an
how
easy out.
it is an easy out. Say, "Hey, how are things going? What challenges are you facing? How's your family? You've got kids in school. How's things going for them in school? That type
Mhm.
of thing. If their wife has been in the hospital, ask.
Mhm.
How's your wife doing? I know she was in the hospital. Do you need anything?" Genuinely,
Yeah.
do you need anything? So those are the type of meaningful questions. And when, we ask, where do you want to go in your career? And how can I help you? Say, hey, another meaningful question is, uh, let's talk about how I'm doing. Am I doing anything that's driving you crazy? Should I be doing something different? Those type of questions. These are questions that really make us vulnerable.
And you have to be humble
Yes.
to be willing to ask those questions as the leader,
Yeah. Yeah.
knowing that someone might give you feedback
Right. That you don't want to hear.
you don't want to
And
hear.
for the people who are listening and they're not watching, folks, you're going to hear a little silence. But for the people who are watching, when I'd say, "Hey, how are things going? How are things going in the department? What do you like? What do you not like about the department? What do you like or not like about the shift? What do you like or not like, about my leadership?" And then I would do this.
Drink his coffee.
Yep, take a mouthful of hot coffee because that forced me to keep my mouth shut
Mm,
and listen. Listen. When you're connecting with people, it goes beyond just asking those type of questions, those meaningful questions. Now it means shut your pie hole and listen to what they got to say.
yeah,
Genuinely listen to what they got to say and then paraphrase it, repeat it back. These are simple communications tips, but are so difficult for people to engage in.
absolutely.
Mm.
Yeah. And we do have a warning we want to share with people about, you want to come across authentic, but if you don't come across authentic, what could happen?
Wow, people know.
Yep.
And I have experienced that. If you're in a room full of people and you ask the question, "How you doing? How you doing? How you doing? How you doing?" And I'd seen that play out. And I had people on my shift tell me, this guy doesn't care. I feel like I'm just on his checklist. He's got a checklist. He's just asking that question, how you
Mhm.
doing? And then moving on. And then he's hit his boxes and he thinks that he's connecting with people.
Mm,
And I heard that quite frequently about an individual. People know when somebody is a phony.
yeah.
They know when someone is a phony. We watched, a political event here a few months ago, and one of the individuals on there, I mean, she just had this fake plastic smile. I mean, it was like it was forced. I was like, that woman's a phony,
Hmm.
an absolute phony. So yeah, people know, Emily.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
So, what are the challenges that leaders face in making time for personal connection?
Well, it is going to be the schedule. It's absolutely going to be the schedule.
Yeah,
But we hear so often, and I've mentioned this before on our podcast, you, it's another pat thing that comes out of organizations where they will say our people are our most important asset. Yeah, but they don't treat them that way.
right.
Yeah. And so hey, if you're going to talk about people being your most important asset, then set the priority there that it is the people. Yes, there
Yeah.
are challenges. I had project work that I needed to accomplish as the battalion chief. The crews, each of them were involved in various projects. They had station duties that they needed to accomplish. I knew that at the beginning of the shift, there's going to be truck checks, checking all the equipment and things like that. I knew what the training schedule was. Yep. And then when you throw in emergencies, emergency response, whether I was attached to that assignment or not, or, they were. We would laugh about this, Emily. I'd go up to Station 5, and we got busy enough to the point that I would put it in the calendar when I was doing station visits. I we went for about 2 months that every time I went up to Station 5, I'd get about a block away and they'd get dispatched on a call. and, and I would listen to the nature of the call. And that's where it's like, okay, well, I'm going to go on up. I'll make sure we got a pot of coffee on, and I'll wait for them to come back. And sometimes it's like, well, okay, this sounds like it might be, yeah, if it was something complex, well, I was going to be attached to that myself, like a
Right.
fire or a rescue, dive rescue, those type of things. But if, if it was usually it was a single patient medical call, but if it sounded like, okay, I got up to the station, put on the pot of coffee, and I'm listening. They got the patient loaded up in the bus or the ambulance, and they, hey, I hear, well, we got a rider going in. Like, well, okay, I need to move on. So they're
Came back to fresh coffee, you
yeah,
know.
yeah, that's it. They came back to a fresh pot of coffee. So that, yeah, the schedule is a challenge.
Um,
And for the leader, you have to work around that schedule. You've got to work around these other things. People eat lunch.
mhm.
And that's a great time to spend with folks is, go eat lunch with them. Don't be so distant. And also, hey, chiefs, don't schedule time to go out to have lunch with the crew. And then when the city manager or the board president walks in and you say, oh, let's go to lunch. You say, oh, okay.
Mhm.
Yeah. And you just blew off your people.
Yeah.
You just blew them off.
Yeah.
And if you got your lips attached to the city manager or the board president's rear end like that, guess what? Everybody in the organization knows that all you're doing is brown nosing and you're
Mhm.
screwing over your crews. If you think you got any credit with the crews when you're doing that crap, you're nuts. You're out of your mind. And then you're going to be the same one that says, our people are our most valuable asset. They don't believe it.
Yep.
Mhm.
So, can you share any strategies for incorporating relationship building just into the daily leadership responsibilities?
Yeah, so some people, when you look at the introvert extrovert aspect of things,
Mhm.
and there's that one in the middle that which is an ambivert, and that's a person that goes back and forth,
Yeah.
between the introvert and the extrovert. I was really an introverted individual for a number of years. So, folks, if you're on the introverted side and you're in a supervisory position, a leadership position, that's not going to play out very well for you. You're going to have to learn to overcome that. I'd
Mhm.
already mentioned Maxwell's book, uh, Everyone Communicates, Few Connect. In 2023, he wrote another book, The 16 Undeniable Laws of Communication. They're two fantastic books. And then a third book that I will throw out there is called Crucial Conversations. It's a smaller book, but there's a three resources right there that I recommend. Well, anybody read, period, whether you're an introvert or not. For the introverts, and actually for the extroverts too, because the lady who wrote this book was writing it almost as a manual for extroverts. Her name is Susan Cain, and her book is The Power of Q or Quiet, and she explains her introversion. She was an introvert throughout high school, through college, and she became a lawyer. And being an introvert as a lawyer doesn't work out, very well. So,
No.
these strategies, overcoming these things, go get a coach, someone that can help you through these things. And also, hey, here's another way to learn how to connect with people. Seek out your local Toastmasters chapter where you can show up and you're going to meet other people outside of your profession, and you've got an opportunity to give speeches. And I was a member of Toastmasters for a little over 2 years until there was a scheduling conflict and I had to drop out. And I seen some folks come in that were really, really wallflowers and quiet, and then within a few months, when they were in that environment where everybody was there to help them, they learned how to come out of that shell. So that's another strategy. So there are ways, or find somebody who's trusted, a trusted
Yeah.
mentor that can help you out of that. So you're not just going along, because again, you're going to be supervising people. You need to know how to connect with them. And that, Emily, that ties into the self-awareness role as well. And there's some folks that are socially awkward.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, you and I, I'm thinking of two right now, and you're probably thinking of the same two
Mhm.
individuals. And it just, if you're an at-home worker and you're never interacting with people, you could get away with that.
Hmm.
But you can't get away with that when you are leading people. And one final thing before we move on to the next area of this topic is connecting with people does not mean that you're a pushover.
Yeah.
And when you're in a leadership role, you need to be careful. You're going to have friends that you have developed in the organization. And it's especially true in fire and police and EMS and in the military, where, one day you're peers and the next day you're their boss.
Hmm.
And that can be a very difficult transition. But don't become a pushover. Don't become the dictator or, where you're Napoleon Bonaparte, but, you know, coming across like the dictator. Let me add in with Napoleon Bonaparte too, and studying some books about him. He would go out and he would visit the troops.
Hmm.
So did
Wow.
George Patton.
Hmm.
Yeah, when everybody was getting shot at, Patton was out there visiting the troops. So did Winston Churchill during World War II.
Yeah.
Visited the troops. He went up to coal mines. He went down to the docks. He went to the factories. So again, I'm a hit. The people say, I just don't have time to do that. Yeah,
Prime Minister.
yeah. Yeah. Well, the Prime Minister of England did during World War II. So you really you don't have any excuse. Or
Yeah.
even General Mad Dog Mattis when we first went into Afghanistan. There's a book called One Bullet Away. Nathan Fick is the author, and he was a Marine Corps officer, and he was describing one night going out checking his Marines who were in their fighting holes, and there's only supposed to be two. And as he was crawling up to one of them, he saw a third head,
Mm.
and his initial thought was, "Oh, great, a Taliban has infiltrated the fighting hole." And as he got closer, it's like, no, it was General Mattis. He was a division commander at that time. General Mattis, in the middle of the morning, was visiting the troops. So for you people who say I don't have time, that's nothing but a lie.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an excuse. And my wife says an excuse is the skin of reason stuffed with a lie. So coming back to the pushover thing.
uh,
Yeah, connecting with people doesn't mean that you're a pushover. You've got to know where that boundary is at, and you have to set that boundary as well. And there may be times when that friendship comes to an end because you have to step in and you have to insert yourself and you have to do something from a progressive disciplinary standpoint. I've lost
mm,
friendships over the years. I had to relieve an individual from being an acting officer, and we had been friends for a long time, and that definitely it impacted the relationship. So,
yeah.
yeah, they're setting the boundaries, Emily. It's
Yeah.
very, very important. And folks, that can be difficult as well. What's his name? Henry Cloud, I believe, is the
Yeah.
author. The book is called Boundaries.
And Townsend.
Yeah,
Maybe.
yeah.
Yeah.
Emily has read that book. I read it an awful long time ago and was just going through it here last week to refresh myself on a few things before my wife and I met with uh, a couple people. But there are things out there that can help people that set strategies to set boundaries.
Yeah. I've kind of coined this term for myself. Being an introvert is be friendly but wise.
Ah,
Use
yes.
wisdom and discernment. You can still be friendly, but you can also be wise and see who's safe and who's not safe.
Yeah, yeah. You have anything else to add about that, Emily, and that who's safe and who is not safe? Is there any way that or tips that you could share with people of what you do to measure whether or not somebody is safe or not?
I pray for discernment for
Hmm.
one.
Uh,
But I've learned that if you share something and then someone starts prying more, like trying to dig in
mhm,
and get a little bit more information, they're not a safe person.
mhm. Okay. Yeah.
If they're coming out genuinely, like genuinely asking like how you are doing, but not in a prying way,
Mhm.
then they might be a safe person.
Okay. All right. Great. Hey,
Yeah.
thanks for adding those tips in there. So, you know, and connecting with people, Emily, I've shared this story with you in the past, and we'll share it here with the folks on our podcast. Is, Deb and I, we were at Barnes and Noble one day, and I was in the leadership management business section, and there was a younger lady that was in there, and she just, threw out the question, what leadership books do you read?
Hmm.
Now, I generally have not been asked that question. I've been approached by other people at Barnes and Noble when they initially come across as being friendly. And folks, I've actually had this happen more than one time. When they come across like they're being friendly, they want to ask you a question. And then they were trying to push me into a multi-level marketing scheme.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Hey, stuff it. Get out of my face. But this young lady asked, hey, what leadership books do you read? And so I mentioned a couple of them to her, and then that was followed up by another great question is, what is it about those books that you like?
Hmm.
So my wife and I, Deb and I, we stood there in the aisle and talked to her for about 45 minutes
Wow.
about leadership, and she was asking for recommendations. So that comes into discernment as well. She had a
Yeah.
genuine question versus, a couple of these other clowns that had approached me just wanting me to become part of whatever scheme that they were doing.
And sometimes you do have to take that risk to
Mhm.
engage with them, but you'll catch on pretty quickly of is it coming from genuineness or disingenuine.
Yeah, yeah, you're absolutely right. And listen, folks, um, we need to be friendly.
Hmm.
We need to be friendly. And Emily just talked about discerning between someone who's disingenuous and someone who isn't. We are living in a society where I mean, people are angry.
Yeah.
They're angry, and they're angry over some of the most stupid things. And and some people just want to, open and just give you what their opinions are.
Hmm.
That's not connecting. You know, if I say hi to you and you start going off on me about President Trump, I'll just shut you down. Yeah. If I say hi to you and you start going off on me about the price of gasoline, I shut you down. That's not being friendly,
Yeah.
at all. And that's not engaging. That's not You do not have the ability to engage in a spontaneous conversation. Show some curiosity about people's lives. What do they do? What do you like about the job that you do? What are some of the challenges in your position? How have you overcome those challenges? Those type of things. Those are the things when we can seize that opportunity, and we just may be able to impact their lives ourselves. So, leadership is about leaving a lasting impact.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so the key takeaways of this episode was leadership is about connection, authenticity, and availability.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Availability. Make yourself available. Listen, if you say, I have an open door policy, that live it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's an easy thing to say. It's one thing to say it and another thing to actually live it.
Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah.
So, we want to challenge our listeners, leave you with this thought to identify one way that you can build a stronger connection with your team this week. Or if you don't have a team, maybe with an individual
Yeah.
that
Mhm.
you can think of or meet this
Yeah.
week.
Hmm.
Invite engagement, share stories with them. I am reading the wrong thing.
Yeah, you're okay. Yeah, yeah. It's invite engagement with people.
Mhm.
Uh, Listen to them. Don't dominate. Don't dominate the conversation. Uh, Sometime back on one of these podcasts, I talked about networking and how people just want to dominate. And I had a Zoom meeting with a fella a couple years ago, just happened to look down at the time on the computer, and it was 1:28, and this guy started yammering on until 2:01. I uh, I had turned it into an experiment. I wanted to see how long this guy was going to talk. So from 1:28 to 2:01, he just talked continuously. And then when he got done, he says, "Oh, well, I probably ought to let you say something. I do have a tendency to talk a lot." What?
You're
No
no kidding.
fooling. Yeah, no fooling. I've had one-on-one meetings with people that I've met at a networking event, and they say, "Hey, I want to learn about, what you do, Rick, in the Fire Officer Leadership Academy." And they never ask. I'll sit there with a cup of coffee and it's all about what they do.
Hmm.
Or they were trying to use me to get their business into the fire department. And that typically was people who were doing physical fitness training. Financial planners were really guilty of this one quite a bit. Never asked any questions about myself or about my business. All I heard about was their business. And then it's like, well, I sure would love to get into your fire department to help people. That's like, it ain't happening, buddy.
Wow.
No, I had a chiropractor pull that. Met him at a networking event, and the guy was very standoffish to me. Later that afternoon, I get this lengthy email from him saying, "Oh, I love first responders. I love firefighters and police officers and medics, and going on. I would love to meet with you to find out how I can serve them." I wrote the guy back and said, "No, number one, we already have a chiropractor. He's a very good one. Danny El Natan is his name." And I said, I've already referred him into my department. So that's not connecting.
Yeah.
That's not connecting. That's not it. That's not uh, engaging.
Yep.
So we started out, Emily, talking about bridges.
Yeah.
Any final thought on that?
No, I think our closing thought is that leaders build bridges. So make sure you're connecting and not isolating.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely right. So, hey, folks, thank you for, let's try that one again. Thank you for tuning in and listening to our podcast, Firehouse Talks with Jersey Rick, Igniting Leadership Excellence. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please like and subscribe and share. Visit my website
Yeah.
at www.fireofficerleadershipacademy.com. Link is in the show notes. Learn more about the services I offer. And then also on my website in the upper left-hand corner, you will see a link for the blog. I post a blog on the website weekly on Mondays, and then it gets reposted out on my LinkedIn profile on Wednesday mornings. And so check out my book, The Furnace of Leadership Development, available on Amazon in print, ebook, and audio. And yours truly read that. So anything?
Give it the Jersey Rick charm.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Anything, Emily, before we sign off here?
Nope, I think that's a wrap.
Okie dokie. Okay, thank you again for listening and tune in again.
Bye.